From Beethoven to Bon Jovi to Beyoncé, music has driven society for millennia. It has served many purposes across times and cultures, communicating plans among the Underground Railroads, expressing worship across religions, uniting people in celebration, and so much more. And as humanity progressed from ancient times to the modern day, music has become more widespread and more advanced than ever. As our material world digitized, music itself has changed and become one with contemporary influences. The invention of the Musical Instrument Digital Interface, or MIDI, acted as a turning point in the early 1980s, taking music production from having a limited selection of sounds and a necessity for extensive resources to becoming an accessible and empowering art form driven by a broad variety of unique sounds. The 70s in America were a time of protest. African Americans continued their fight for equality after the Civil Rights Movement. The first Pride Parade was held in New York after the Stonewall Riots of 1969, and Harvey Milk was elected in California, becoming the first openly gay man to hold office at the end of the decade. Some Americans at the time were also protesting the ongoing war in Vietnam, and many people's faith in the government was shaken with the Watergate scandal. The 80s is often associated with materialism and consumerism, and the rise of blockbuster movies, as well as the networks like CNN and MTV. Sally Ride brought women empowerment out of this world in 1983, being the first woman to go to space. At the same time, tragedies such as the AIDS crisis took the lives of over 700,000 Americans. As far as technology goes, computers during these 2 decades went from the hands of the rich corporations to households with the release of Microsoft Word and the first Apple computer. Digital entertainment also grew rapidly with the release of the Japanese video game Pac-Man. Rising out of the ashes of post-World War poverty, Japan had entered a new industrialization and consumerism. By the 1970s, Japan's economy was soaring as the second largest in the world and had incentivized the production of digital systems, and businesses like Sony and Roland began to manufacture everything from TVs to audio systems. This technological renaissance opened many doors for the digitalization of the corporate world as well as entertainment in the forms of video games, films, art, and evidently, music. In the American 70s, brands like ARP and Moog released sequencers, which store notes and rhythm messages, that had the ability to communicate with some synthesizers, which turned those messages into the unique sound that hit your ear. However, only deep-pocketed specialists had access to this equipment and the knowledge to operate it, and a lot of the equipment couldn't connect between manufacturers, creating a large obstacle for producing music. This meant that very few people actually had the opportunity and/or resources to create recorded music. In terms of the music itself, only one note could be played at a time, and the system was unreliable and difficult to fix. As the sound of polyphony, or multiple simultaneous notes, rose in popularity, there was an increasing demand for easier production. To solve these issues and satisfy the needs of musicians across the globe, Ikutaro Kakahashi of the Roland Corporation in Osaka, Japan, and Dave Smith of Sequential Circuits in San Francisco, California, started their journey to create a standard of technological communication across musical devices. Dave Smith, with the close help of sound designer John Bowen, set out to create the world's first programmable polyphonic synthesizer, which would be called Sequential Circuits Prophet 5. The Prophet 5 was able to produce multiple sounds at once, as demanded by artists everywhere, and is responsible for the classic sound of 80s pop music. Smith first showed the Prophet 5 to the National Association of Musical Merchants' 1978 Winter Convention. It gained shocking but deserved recognition from artists and became a blueprint of modern music. Almost every major artist used the Prophet 5 for both live and recorded music. Its distinct sound became a staple of songs both then and now. Demand grew so great that Dave Smith reported that artists would beg their offices for whatever products they had left.
While the Prophet 5 was gaining rapid attention, Dave Smith was still looking for a way to standardize the communication between devices of different manufacturers.
So, in 1981, he and an engineer, Chet Wood, presented a proposal for a universal synthesizer interface at the Audio Engineering Society's National Convention.
Since Ikutaro Kakehashi was thinking of similar concepts across the Pacific, he and Dave Smith came together to convince music makers of the world to join their side of this musical revolution.
And we sat there and talked for a few hours, and it became clear that a lot of people had no interest in the compromise aspect of this.
Manufacturers were hesitant to give up their isolated ecosystems and favored their business's model of selling products with proprietary components that required other products from the same family. This was standard among big business companies such as Moog and Oasis.
However, once manufacturers realized that it was in their best interest to make their devices more accessible to consumers of varying levels of skill and wealth, they ultimately decided to buy into the new standard Smith was cooking up.
And we sat down, just a small group of us, and we just said, let's do it. Forget everybody else. Nobody else is interested in it. Let's just do it.
Musicians and designers were won over at the National Association of Music Merchants Convention of 1982, where Smith and Kakehashi, with the vocal support of the major musical instrument manufacturers, showed the world how their new language could communicate between two separately manufactured instruments using the sequential circuits Profix 600 and Roland's Jupiter 6. They called this new language Musical Instrument Digital Interface, or MIDI.
It really exploded because it's cheaper than, and it's not a proprietary system, so you could have any number of companies' products in your arsenal.
That's crazy if you think about what's happening. Like this is receiving input, turning it into digital information, sending it through the cable, putting my computer, taking that digital information, turning it into acoustic information, and then sending it through speakers, and instantly. It's very impressive. So
MIDI has turned the sound of music into what we know it as today. The sounds created by polysynths with MIDI capabilities have found a very prominent place across genres through artists from Taylor Swift to Eminem to a teenager bored in their room. Since MIDI offered a way to connect equipment easily and affordably, musicians who are just starting out have been able to create more than ever. Even beginner musicians are now able to build their own home studios, allowing for writing, recording, and releasing music.
This spun off a whole new era of independent artists, turning the word indie from a status of funding to a whole new genre.
The day of getting found on a label is really kind of in the past, right? You usually make your career, and then a label discovers you, then you get taken off. And I think that comes from being able to do everything on the computer using MIDI.
Many artists got their start thanks to MIDI. Billie Eilish, Hozier, and Ed Sheeran are just a few examples of successful musicians who sprouted from the music they made when they were young independent artists and recording music with MIDI. Phineas started as a bedroom producer, a title unknown to a world without MIDI, but went on to win 10 Grammys.
The way I want any home studio to function is I want it all to be as fast as I can think of an idea, I want to be able to articulate it.
Because we're not at a recording studio where different people are there every day and people are down the hall. It's our house and it's where we live and it's where we have experienced everything.
Some argue that modern music has taken a turn for the worse since the 80s by offering inexperienced artists a platform and devaluing live recordings. While there is some truth to this, the live recordings we hear today were actually improved by MIDI as well. Due to sampling and accessibility of equipment, artists can write music from instruments without the presence of a live musician.
And if a person is capable of writing all the parts, there's a complete circle that's made, and the feeling and the emotion that comes out is quite magical, and it's something that's been missing in many other projects that I have done in the past.
The magnitude of this effect on price and availability of production materials was greatly profound. It has made way for musicians that come from backgrounds of poverty, oppression, and injustice to express their experiences to society and facilitate real social change. For example, Kendrick Lamar, a 17-time Grammy-winning rapper, grew up in Compton, California among poverty and violence. With the availability of MIDI in the start of his career, he not only earned success in his own life, but established a platform that he now uses to reach millions of people on topics such as prison reform and racial injustice. The societal impacts of MIDI are undeniable when it comes to creating spaces for oppressed voices. Today, the invention of MIDI is recognized in the Museum of Making Music in Carlsbad, California. It is rare to find an artist or genre that has not been impacted by it technologically, societally, or economically. MIDI made it possible for sequencers and synthesizers to connect and communicate with a new standardized language, thus turning music production from an art of the rich and powerful into one for all people, opening up music to new sounds and new people, which revolutionized the art form from the 1980s up to now.
Down the road, we're going to find that these new technologies are making all sorts of new possibilities for musicians to creatively express themselves.